Today we are going to start another lecture that is regarding the regulation of the hormone secretion, how the regulation of hormones occur, how they are regulated by the positive and negative feedback mechanism. There are various mechanisms that regulate the hormone secretion for with the feedback positive and a feedback and a negative feedback. There are the mechanisms that conducted by the hormone system. To maintain the homeostasis, the secretion of hormones must be turned on or off as needed. For the homeostasis, for the maintenance, there are two mechanisms that are required. The first one is a neural mechanism, then second one is the feedback mechanism. Neural mechanism is and the mechanism that is, in some cases the nervous system directly stimulates endocrine glands to release hormones, which is referred to as neural stimuli or neural mechanism, in which the endocrine glands are released hormones called neural mechanism. Neural mechanism is secreted by the catecholamines. Catecholamines are the neurotransmitters that release out the these hormones that like epinephrine or norepinephrine that are burst out and release energy which is required to the body. In such cases, postganglionic sympathetic nerves synapse as the adrenal medulla, and when stimulated, catecholamines into the circulation. So the catecholamines circulate. So neural mechanism is to release out the hormones that are required for the body. Feedback mechanism are the more common than the neural mechanism. And that's like two mechanisms, majorly two mechanisms. First is neural and another one is feedback mechanism. Feedback mechanism is the common than the neural mechanism. The term feedback means that some elements of the psychological response to the hormone feedbacks, as either directly or indirectly on the endocrine that secreted the hormones, changing its secretion rate. So these hormones act on the feedback mechanism, which some maybe act as directly acting on them, and some act on the indirectly. Feedback can be negative or positive. Negative feedback can be occur or no positive. Positive feedback is rare, but the negative feedback is common. Like here we can see it in the diagram. Positive feedback, how it occurs, but like hypothalamus release the is action on the anterior pituitary, then in the endocrine gland, then the hormone that is estradiol, that is secretory hormone released by hypothalamus after the hypothalamus action on the endocrine gland, which releases by the ovary, and that is uh, that come back to the pituitary if necessary at that point, then convert it into the targeted tissues, then goes to the target tissue and attack and that target tissue. That is the main purpose. In the negative feedback, hypothalamus acts on the pituitary, then and anterior pituitary, then anterior endocrine gland, and then hormone, and then the target tissue, that may be muscle. Here the endocrine gland, we have taken as example testes that and release the testosterone hormone. If the testosterone hormone is to negatively released back to the anterior pituitary, or maybe the long lobes if occurs, then the to the signal goes to the hypothalamus. Negative feedback, what how we describe in detail the principles of the negative feedback underlie the homeostasis regulation of the virtually all organ system. All organ system homeostatically regulated by the negative feedback of for example, negative feedback is involved in the regulation of the arterial blood pressure. Artery is a part of the brain. Here we are discussing a chamber of the heart, in which small charges changes in blood pressure turn on or activate a mechanism that will restore blood pressure back to the normal. Or a decrease in arterial blood pressure is detected by the baroreceptors, which activate coordinated mechanism. So it's this where negative feedback act on the hormone system, and then release further indirectly or directly hormones. Hypothalamus axis on the testosterone, how they are released, their mechanism, and then to the back, as we have discussed in the previous slide. Long feedback loop versus a short feedback. There are two loops. Long feedback means hormones feed back all the way to the hypothalamic activity, and short means anterior pituitary hormone feedback on the thalamus to inhibit secretion. So the third possibility of third short loop is the inhibition of on the secretion. So these are the loops that are taken into the negative feedback mechanism. Net result of any version of the negative feedback in generally we will discuss that the hormone levels are judged by the physiological action. So again repeated the slide how the negative feedback occurs. And negative feedback loops other than the hypothalamus pituitary axis. And there are other examples of the negative feedback that do not utilize the hypothalamic pituitary axis. For example, insulin regulates blood glucose concentration. In turn, insulin secretion is turned on or off by the changes on the in the blood glucose concentration. So it's this one is another example of the negative feedback loop other than the hypothalamic activity. So how the regulation of the insulin takes us, here we will see in the slides that there are insulin secretion regulation occurring, and here the regulation of calcitonin, that is another hormone that is released out, and by regarding to the calcium, that is related to the calcium. Positive to the for the bones, positive feedback how it's occur. Positive feedbacks of features actions are more causes more secretion of the hormones, like a negative feedback which is limiting self-limiting. And non-hormonal example of the positive feedback is like we'll discuss it as sodium pump channels during how when they are open during the upstroke of the action potential depolarization occur. Then the voltage sensitive channels and causes re-entry of the sodium potential sodium ions, which leads to the more depolarization and more sodium entry. Then this self enforcing process produces a rapid explosive. So the next is the positive feedback estrogen and gonadotropins. Estrogen and gonadotropins, how they work in hormonal system. The primary examples of the positive feedback is the effect of the estrogen on the secretion of the follicle stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone by the release interior pituitary at the midpoint of the menstrual cycle. So during the phase of the these phase FSH and LH have two effects on the ovaries: ovulation and stimulation of the estrogen. So these are released and work there properly, and anterior pituitary more causes more estrogen secretion, explosive events occurs. Then the positive feedback on the oxytocin. A second example is the Positive feedback on the oxytocin dilation of cervix occurs, and oxytocin stimulation occurs, and explosive event to the parturition and during the deliveries and of the uterus in the fetus.